The previous lesson, we introduced you to Bootstrap forms, and we saw how Bootstrap allows us to represent our form content in a nice output for our web users. Now, one of the really neat things about Bootstrap is its ability to create buttons. And I know everybody loves buttons, and Bootstrap really delivers within buttons. So we've got a number of different button options here, and you can see that the typical format here is that so we've got the regular HTML, and then we're applying a class of button. So we can actually transform any element into a button. So let's say I had a div here and I give it a class of btn, and now we need to specify what type of button we want. So I'm going to set it up as a primary and just write this is a div, but it looks like a button. I'm not going to write all of it. But essentially we see that we just transformed this div into a button. So really cool and nice functionality that's available in Bootstrap. And this is the beauty of Bootstrap, is because these classes can be applied to any element. So we can literally transform elements as needed and as we want to represent them within our website. So if we're using something like JavaScript or jQuery, where we don't necessarily need to have an HTML element with its default properties of button, we can really transform these in using Bootstrap, so we don't even have to use any hyperlinks or buttons and so on, and then we pick it up within JavaScript and jQuery. So any element can be transformed to look any way that we want it to look. So we are going to use typical button, so I just want to show you that there is a way to do this other than that. So because we do have a form here, so this form button type is going to be a submit, because we want it to have the ability to submit our content, and I'm just going to type submit here as the value of the button. So we see that we've got those standard plain old HTML buttons, which really look dated with modern website development. So always a good idea to style your buttons and make them nice and neat, because you do want users to be enticed to click on them, and these type of buttons, they look really clickable and they present really nicely. So this is Bootstrap buttons. And as I said, there's a whole bunch of options for buttons. And what we had looked at before, where we saw that we had different colors for the different values within Bootstrap. So we have a bunch of buttons represented here. And we see that once we update the colors as well, we update the colors of the buttons. So these are the typical buttons here. And we see we've got some options here for the different colors. So we've got 5 different colors, Bootstrap 4. This is still Bootstrap 3 that we're looking at, but we do have options here. And we've also got options to keep the buttons as a block. So basically what this means is that that button will take that entire block of code, or a block of available space. So if I was to do something like that, we see that the button takes that whole default block, and default doesn't work anymore with Bootstrap 4. So this is where we need to use warning or one of the other colors. So you see that we've got that full width with block. And then we can pull buttons over to the left, right, and middle. We can bring them all together and so on. So we've got an option here where we've got a bunch of buttons here, and we can group the buttons together. So this is another really neat thing that you can do with Bootstrap, is you get the ability to bring them all together. So I'm going to do some different button colors here. So we've got warning, primary. And these are colors that get reused over and over again. We saw this within tables that we had. I already have warning there, so danger, and so we can see we've got info, warning, danger, success, and so on. So maybe we'll just do this one as success. So we have a nice color scheme of buttons being laid out for us. So let's open that up, and we see that we can group them all together. So really nice and neatly presented buttons. And if you're looking for something a little bit more, there's a few of these button generators online. So all I have to do is Google search. I usually like to use Plugo Labs Twitter button generator version 3. They don't have a version 4 yet, but the syntax is going to be literally the same. The only thing that with Bootstrap 4, we don't have these default glyphcons, so you might run into some trouble when you're using those. So I would not use the glyphcons. So I would just remove out the icons if you're using this generator, and not use default, but you can use the other 5 colors there. So we have an option to type in some text there, so we can just say click me. We've got an option for mini, small, default, and large, so it gives you a better idea of the different sizing of buttons that you can create. Here, the next one is just the button type. So as we said before, we've got a lot of options here. We can apply styling to any element. We can apply those button styling to any element, so they just give you some options here. We can also set our buttons to be active or disabled. So that's a really nice feature. And then we've got that full width block option. So definitely worthwhile checking these generators out, and also just seeing all the different really neat things you can do with buttons just by changing and updating them. And with Bootstrap 4, we actually got some other options for buttons as well. So we can also, so if I wanted to create another button type here, so I should have actually kept that div, but here's another button. So we'll just do div, and we'll give it a class of btn to give it a button class. So we see that we've got another button being created here, and whenever we just do the btn, so we don't actually have anything, we don't have any outline or anything showing up. So with the buttons, so we saw how we can do the background colors of the buttons, but we can also do these outline of buttons. And whenever you use these within combination, you get some really nice neat effects. So maybe we'll do primary. Actually we haven't done info yet, so let's do info. So see that what happens here is it does a reverse of doing a filling in of that content, but it fills it in and keeps the border and the color of the input text there within that size. So some really nice options there within buttons. And one other thing that I really want to add in, so with Bootstrap, there's some really nice functions, and as I said, there's some really cool things you can do with Bootstrap, so this is going to be one of them. So I'm going to create a button group, so just like what we did up here, and we're going to create, so essentially what you can do when you've got your form, instead of, so I did say that we can apply these classes to any type of elements. So if you had a bunch of inputs here, and these are going to be checkboxes actually, and so checkbox, and so this is checkbox 1. So I'm having a little bit of trouble spelling checkbox, I'm not sure why, but so we've got checkbox 1. So we've got this ability to create these really nice neat effects with checkboxes. So if I had checkbox 1, and I'm going to create that effect first, so label. And so the label acts as the container for the checkbox information, and we can see here that when I save it, so we get a little bit of styling there, and if I had a bunch of checkboxes here, so I had checkbox 2 and so on, so we've got a number of checkboxes here. Now watch what happens when I apply the button class to this checkbox. So this is the really nice cool thing about it, is that we get this kind of checked off feel to it with the checkbox button. And I also have actually an option, so it still doesn't look really great because we can check it, uncheck it, and so on, but we still have this problem or styling issue here where we've got the default checkbox. So we can actually data toggle them as buttons. So we can see that once it gets checked off, then we can set to different states. So let's try this out now and add in another class here to this one here. And I'll add in a third checkbox as well. So we have 3 checkboxes. So we see that we've got this ability here to toggle the different buttons and make them interactive and so on. And I had to do a quick update because the outline actually didn't really work well with the button colors because we couldn't really see them as well, so I updated them to BTN warnings, and of course we can do primary and so on, so we can have different colors if we wanted to and so on for the buttons. So we can make them nice and colorful like that. So now you're probably looking at this and saying, okay, well, that looks nice, but how do I tell when the checkbox is checked off? Because now that I've toggled the data buttons, I can't actually see if they're on or off. And this is where we need to add jQuery in. And this is where the JavaScript library creates that functionality where we can see what button is checked off, and we see the active ones go darker. And you can also apply this to radio buttons as well if you want to. You could transform them into buttons as well. And this is again for the user experience. Makes it really nice and well represented for users. So it probably performs a lot better if they're all the same color. And of course you can set that selected class as well. So if you wanted to, we could specify which one is checked off. So if I had something where I had it pre-checked already, so let's just refresh this. And we can specify which one is active. Also, besides checked, we have to, or the checked actually should be within here. So let's refresh that. And I'll just show you what happens. So we don't actually see it that it's checked off. So here we have to add in active. And this will give us the ability to see the active one, and we can see that it gets checked and unchecked and so on. So definitely buttons are one of my favorite things about Bootstrap, and this is all the different really cool things you can do where you can transform these elements and present them the way that you want them presented for your web users.